Hi, I'm Bob Schwartz. Please, if you're still working in, find a seat. We are really excited to have you here. The reason I'm saying hi is I work here. This is my day job, believe it or not. So you guys are all here for what I think is going to be a great session. I'm excited about the session as well. Just to kick it off, I want to just say a couple of things. One, just really quickly, should there be any kind of an emergency, your exit is the way you came in, or there's one exit behind you by the garage door. So be aware of that. Later on, you're going to need to know the restrooms are behind this wall. But welcome. I'm part of what we call the Capgemini Applied Innovation Exchange. For those of you that don't know Capgemini, I want to talk to you over a beverage of your choice when we finish. But what we are is we're a global, we say global system integrator. What we do is we help clients throughout the world, particularly with IT-oriented problems. We do a lot of technology, consulting, outsourcing, things like that. What we do here in this space is super exciting, and what we're doing is we get together with academic institutions, ecosystem players, startups, and of course our own expertise, and we rally around customer problems, help customers innovate. So don't tell my boss he's here too, but I've got the best job in the company, that's what we get to do day in, day out, is help our clients innovate and deal with this crazy change in what's going on in business and with technology. This is, as you know, just our series of let's get in front of and let's hear about and let's engage with some cool ideas and some things that are impacting our world, impacting innovation, impacting technology. So we welcome you here. We hope you enjoy our space. Certainly, yeah, there's a few of us around if you want to learn more about Capgemini, but I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get to the session. So Pete, if you'll kick us off.
Hey, thank you, Bob. And thanks everyone for coming to Year 3 we're entering of What's Now San Francisco, which is a really big milestone. And What's Now San Francisco, for those who are, there's a lot of new faces here, basically every month we go to some different field that's going through some really big innovative changes. We find some kind of remarkable innovator in there and get them to come out and tell what is happening in that field now and what it means for people outside that field. And we've been doing this systematically for a couple years now. We've actually had one of the first ones to come in was Kevin Kelly here. It was our second one over 2 years ago. Kevin basically was trying to explain what, his insights in AI, artificial intelligence, but of course, Kevin, you can never contain him, so he was basically talking about all kinds of stuff. We couldn't keep him to one field. But anyhow, we've been doing this now for 2 years, and we actually are now expanded to New York. So we've got What's Now New York. If you have colleagues there, in fact, next week we'll be doing one out there. So anyhow, it's all going good. Now, one of the things, today we're not going to be talking about a field so much going through innovation, but a scene. And one of the things that's been interesting to me over the years here in San Francisco is there's a lot of these kind of physical places, like houses, sometimes these old Victorian mansions or some kind of space, that people combine both living and working. They fuse kind of their work life with their kind of personal life. They tend to have events through these things, and they also have good parties. And over the years, I've seen enough of this to say, you know, instead of talking about a field, let's get someone who knows that, someone or a couple people that actually understand that scene, explain what's going on in that space. That's one thing. And also, since basically most of the people living in these scenes are millennials, that generation from 36 to 19 right about now, it's also, there's something about the generational insights of how that generation is working differently, particularly on the creative edge, the front edge that often surfaces in these spaces. Now, the other thing about this kind of series is we're trying over time to cross-connect different fields through these different events, because everyone who gets invited kind of can come back to the next one. And one of the things about, there's a multidisciplinary kind of network piece of this, but there's also, we're trying to think about it a little bit more, also the diversity of generations. And so it was about a year ago, I was actually at a place, one of these places, the Factory. There's a bunch from the Factory, the Red Vic, there's the Embassy, there's something called the Hive, there's a bunch of these scenes. I was at one of these places with our two guests today, had organized an intergenerational dinner. And unfortunately, I was termed as one of the wise elders, and I didn't mind I didn't mind the word wise, but elder was kind of like, come on. Really? But anyhow, we were talking with our guests. They were thinking how they wanted to connect up to different kind of innovators in kind of older generations, as well as we wanted to connect younger folks too. So that's another kind of the impetus that we've got going here today for this conversation. Now, so we're talking about scene. We're trying to bring it in a kind of different network conversation here. And so we're going to bring up our two guests. Now, the first one is Ting Kelly. We're going to actually have two people talking today. Now, Ting Kelly, I've known for a long, long time. And in fact, the first time I met Ting, I was looking under a desk at Wired Magazine, and I saw this little kid playing with all the kind of Ethernet cables. And I figured, who's that? And it was Kevin Kelly's daughter, Ting. And I also had a little daughter, younger than Ting. And Kevin and I were the only people at Wired Magazine who had kids. And so we had dogs, we had cats running around, we had a parrot in the place, we had animals, but no kids. And so they were like, what are these things, these little things? Like, how do they work? So Kevin and I were the kind of innovators, the cutting edge of that, bringing in kids into the space. So I've known her for a long time as she's become a professional, as she's developed and doing her own company and all of the work she's doing now. Awesome to have her with us today. And with her, she's also going to be with Carson Linforth Bowley, who is her business partner in Meta Pattern. It's a company, kind of a experiential design firm that they work together. But they're also, you could say, long-term partners, life partners. And that's a big part of the story here, that it's not just work, it's also living. And we're going to be looking at that kind of thing. They also are founders of a thing called EMERGENT Collective, I think it is. And that is also part of the story, too. So what I want to do is get out of the way of the story. They're going to come up here for do a presentation, the two of them, about this scene, the generation, and kind of their insights on where this is going. And then I'm going to come back at the end of that and ask them a few missing questions as we roll into a conversation with all you. Because again, another piece of this is it's not about the people on the stage or even me. It's really about the collective intelligence in this space here from different backgrounds, different disciplines. And also, how many people here have some experience or some tie or associated with in any way any of these places that are essentially these live workspaces? We've got the embassy, the hive, the factory. Yeah, a lot of different hands here. So we're going to have collective wisdom of everybody coming together here. We'll have a great conversation. So let's get Ting and Carson up here right now. Come on up.
Gosh.
Wow. Hello, everyone.
Oh, beautiful people. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Let's see. Hi, Ting.
Hello.
Hey. Well, so a word of context before we get started. First of all, it's a little unusual for us to be sitting facing an audience like this. Typically, we like to do this in circle and flatten it a bit.
Yeah.
But this is how this is tonight, so we'll be presenting. We also want to say we're not on a book tour. We haven't written this and premeditated it and come to you to sell something. This is really just our live reflections from what's been our life. And rather than, I think, climbing up on some distant branch and doing some kind of research paper, tonight we wanted to kind of come back to our roots and just share what's been true for us and what we've seen, and hopefully share some inspiration or some hope or some familiarity with this generation and this movement. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, I just want to thank Pete so much again for having us. And there's so many people here in the room that I just want to say that we are really just spokeswomen and men for. This work is absolutely, we're just on the front line sharing the story, but it's so much of a collective effort. So I just want to share that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So, we have different little rituals we like to do. It's part of our work and part of what we're sharing. Our favorite ritual, anytime we sit down and start something new, we like to take 5 deep breaths. It's a way to get a group of people in a business context or whatever just to meditate, frankly. So if you guys will indulge us, we'll take 5 deep breaths together.
You guys
just
up
help us
for
ground.
it? All right, so just put your feet on the ground, and we'll just take a moment to center. Everyone is coming from probably traffic and meetings and emails, so I just want to be here right now.
Works every time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Welcome.
So we thought we'd start with a bit of our genesis, just to give some context. And this photo of Ting is so adorable, I couldn't not include it. Thank you, Kevin, for documenting the genesis of this beautiful woman so well. Ting, who are you and where did you come from?
Yeah, so just a little background for people who don't, I had my bio on the website, but I'm a native of San Francisco. I really, as mentioned by Peter, grew up in really the kind of gestalt, I would say the scenius of the birth of the internet revolution. And being, my parents are actually here sitting in the second row. My mom's a scientist and my dad is a technologist, or really a futurist. I really had this interesting intersection growing up right here in the middle of Silicon Valley as the internet was being birthed. And so, as I got older, I actually became really interested in where do these geniuses exist, other than San Francisco. I was just curious. And so in my, in the last, I would say 15 years, it's been kind of an obsession of mine to find, these geniuses around the world. So I've spent the last 10 years as a nomad, essentially traveling around Asia. I lived in Detroit during the bankruptcy and was there on the ground. Who loves Detroit? And I was really interested in what was happening in these emerging, I call emerging geniuses. So how many people know what a genius is, just for context? So Brian Eno coined this term. Genius is really the word to call it the genius of a scene and a communal genius. So really actually this idea of a collective intelligence that we have here, in this moment, in this room, it's really rooted in a scene and a place. So I traveled, through Asia for 4 months, and I interviewed 200 and plus entrepreneurs and investors and people who were creating co-working spaces, and just became fascinated by what was happening on the ground. So that's bringing me back to what I'm doing now, which I'll share more about. So Carson?
And that path led you to Factory, which
Yeah.
we'll turn into. I'll give it real briefly. I was born to a really devout spiritual practitioner, my mom over here in the cute little hat. She found her way with me kind of on her back to a little spiritual community, really dedicated meditators. And my dad was in LA, kind of pioneering digital visual effects. So really a pioneer of CGI. So it gave me this kind of hybrid perspective in the ways that we make meaning and tell stories and create myths. And also kind of the nature of community, I'd say. So these were both kind of root interests for me. And it led us both to recognize through the lenses of technology, mine from entertainment in LA and Ting's from technology here in the Bay, that there was something changing, that the work that so many people, in fact, many of the speakers here at your series, Pete, the foundations that they set 20 years ago have had cultural ripples that you've kind of predicted, but we kind of had a front row seat to. We saw these things emerging. And what would happen if you gave every person in the world access to all the world's information? What would happen if you gave them the freedom to live and work anywhere? What would happen if you let them connect around their values and their sources of meaning and not just their work or their tribe, let's say? And so we really knew that this renaissance was brewing and wanted to find it, and it led us both back here to San Francisco and to the doorstep of this place. This is the Archbishop's Mansion, otherwise known as Factory. It was actually built by the Vatican, strangely, in 1904, but since came into the possession of a group of kind of renegade technologists and hackers and artists that are kind of a loose collective who've operated out of this place for the past 5 years.
And where did the name Factory come from? I'm like, it kind of seems a little outdated.
Factory. I was against the name Factory, I gotta be honest. I'm like, it's so stiff, and like, who wants to go to a factory? Maddie, who was the brilliant Canadian self-taught hacker who came down here and started this with nothing, not knowing a single person in San Francisco, just so much will, built this and drew together a genius that brought me and you and a whole bunch of really talented people together, not even knowing why yet. The idea of Factory was that in the future, labor, materials, all this is going to be commodified. Robots are going to do it, AI is going to think for us. What matters in the future is creativity, what humans uniquely can do, and more so what we can do together. So what would a space built to harness and cultivate collective intelligence look like? And how would we live?
So
if we were
essentially
optimized
a
for that?
factory for ideas.
A factory for ideas, yeah.
Love it.
Yeah,
Should we take them in?
let's do it. So we thought we might give you a look into the principles that we see at play. We want to take you to the roots, but we thought we could synthesize some of the patterns that we've identified. We have 6 of them. You want to start?
All right, let's go. So the first is immersion. So this concept of immersion really was birthed at Factory, and we'll take you through the process today. We really called it as innovation as a sport. So what would a playing field for innovation actually look like? What are the spaces that you need, the tools, the food, the music? What are all the elements that you would need to really brew the highest level of creativity? So that was our inquiry. And we actually have a few people from the Factory space here, so good to see you guys. Let's go.
So the word immersive gets thrown around a lot. I mean, especially in the rise of AR and VR. What we mean for it is a sense of collective flow, really dialing in the space, dialing in the music, the food, every element of the experience to get people in a field together, in a collective focus. And the house was purpose-built to do this. Let's say you were coming for what we'd call an immersion. You would show up, this kind of crazy Victorian mansion, you'd come in the front door, and inside you would discover that it was actually kind of a futuristic innovation speakeasy. Full custom LED lighting all over the house, custom furniture, built from the ground up in a workshop in the basement with 3D printers and laser cutters whirling, and really built from the ground up by us. We'd start off the immersion out actually in Alamo Square Park. We really believed in getting embodied and getting physical, and also kind of leveling the playing field so that the suits and the scrubs, like everybody was on the same page. So we put everybody into some running shorts and got embodied.
And so this was actually the Nike team. This was our first pilot group that we worked with, and they were really, it was interesting that we actually were working with them first to build a product for them, and they came to us and they said, we really like this, but we're more interested in how you made this. Can you teach us how you made it? So that actually began this whole process in which we actually coined the term immersion as an offering to companies to teach their companies and bring their creative teams into our world, take them through this process, and actually teach them on a meta level how we were innovating, how we were coming up with these ideas. And that started with movement in the morning. We had yoga teachers, boot camp teachers, and then moving in through nutritious breakfast, and then descending down
You come in
into the dojo.
And there's this ominous red staircase. It feels like Dante's, I think, 6th or 7th level of him, I'm not sure. And you descend down like kind of into the nuclear bunker. And the whole basement has been optimized as literally, we think of it like an athletic court for innovation. We really treated it as a sport. So we're counting time really precisely. There's breakout spaces for each of the teams. You can dry erase everything. Displays, everything you'd need to prototype anything. There's a guy named Tom Chi. I'm not sure that Tom made it tonight, but he's really a brilliant inventor and helped us to coin this whole process. Deep respect to Tom. We'd start with paper prototypes and really get the feel of a thing. It was really intended to get us out of our heads and out of our preconceptions and into a physical experiment, into the emotion of a thing.
As the medium, really, versus, just designing on our laptops.
And we moved from paper prototypes, and eventually we would develop really pretty sophisticated digital prototypes using robots. We built an image detection algorithm for a smart shopping cart from scratch. And we do all this in less than 48 hours. So it became this really incredible, we found that by compressing time and space, that you could create a field of creativity that was just exponentially more powerful than you would have in, let's say, like a 6-month process to do the same thing.
Yeah, we call it reducing the time to try. So how could you learn faster as a company? And that's really the key to innovation, is just learning faster and doing more tests. So here, we actually, this is Intuit, yeah, that's right. Perfect, thank you. We also work with Cisco, a bunch of big companies, but actually, still working on a very analog level and on the idea level versus actually getting too far along into creating an expensive product that wasn't actually solving a real problem. Awesome, great.
We wanted to share about immersion because it is really, that experience changed the way that we thought about life and thought about work. And the idea of what a job was, the idea of what an office was, the idea of what even life was really shifted for us. And we started structuring our life differently. We realized we didn't have to take on long engagements and sit continuously at 50% boredom and 30% effectiveness, that we could actually compress it and work with complete focus and complete flow and achieve so much more in less time. What that meant practically was that, like you said, you don't need a mansion to do this work. We could do this work anywhere.
Right, so that was the next phase of this. So, we realized that one of the big issues with the process was that there was still a lack of empathy with really the user. So we're still designing in a mansion, we're still in Silicon Valley. How can we really know if this is going to work or really solve a real problem? So we wanted to fill that empathy gap, and that's what really led us to actually taking immersion on the road. We called it field immersions, and that really prompted us into this more nomadic design studio. And so we really, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So we actually have done work all around the world now with, basically just our backpack, traveling with our Nomad Studio kit, which we have here. So our Pelican cases, which we have all of our Nomad easel here, which we're using, which is basically a tripod that can pack down into your backpack. So no longer do you need an office, no longer do we need a mansion. We can actually do this anywhere. And the key was that we really wanted to meet people where they were at. We didn't want to just expect and make assumptions, but actually go to them, go to their village, understand what their problems were, live a day in the life with them, and then be able to design a solution from there.
Mm-hmm. It brought us, actually, with Mr. Doc North over here, on camelback deep into the hills of Rajasthan, into the dunes, where we met some incredible locals who were pretty intrigued with our technology. Did work with, this is with the MIT Media Lab, working with, this is an all-girls school in Anupsar, India. It's an incredible program that's empowering women. We were using technology to see how we could extend their voices through peer-to-peer kind of mesh networks and video networks. Also working with village women, creating peer-to-peer, again, video sharing. The problem is that there's really limited bandwidth in these places, so if we could create mesh networks where women could share video peer-to-peer, they weren't limited by their illiteracy, and they could learn about health issues or civic issues. They were really empowered by actually just being able to speak to each other directly in a micro kind of social network way. And being there in the field and seeing like, well, okay, this sounds cool from Cambridge, but how does it feel in real life? So the Nomad Studio helps us to get there and to deal with real people and to prototype and evolve concepts in real time in the field. Close the empathy gap, we hope. Similar project, this is Tanzania. This is working actually on reproductive health for teenage girls. This is IDEO.org. And really helping, it was really an honor for me, because IDEO has been a huge inspiration, IDEO.org especially, in the future of design thinking and applied empathy. But getting to teach them the process of immersion and compressed space and time to really to get more done in less time with more empathy than ever before, really.
And I'm curious how the immersion process shifted when you were actually doing it in the field. How much you had to adapt.
It's a lot slower. Like when you're in a basement and you're in San Francisco and everything's dialed, it's pretty easy. It's a controlled environment. When you're in Bagamoyo, Tanzania, everything takes more time. And so, and also the language gap. Like we lost some of the bias of coming to a mansion in San Francisco, but now there's a bias where you're kind of this foreigner and they're in another culture. And really like, it's still, we haven't cracked the code of like how to really tune into empathy. I think, to be honest, the missing piece is just cultivating design talent from every culture. We should be teaching the skills that let any person from any culture solve their own problems, and that's really, to me, what the future is. Just some of the tools we created. We call this the Nomad Easel, kind of a joke, and then our rig, Wilson, just trying to bring the studio out into the world. Our next principle is the idea of myth. We've realized that one of the things that's shaping the world more than anything else is our own idea about the world, the story about the world that we tell. We're seeing that, I think, politically quite a bit right now. Which stream are you in? Which reality are you in? But we're also seeing it with our artist friends who are using the same tools, who are using social media, who are using digital fabrication, who are using all of the implements of the modern age to literally craft new worlds and invite people, invite their audience, invite customers into these worlds with them.
So who's this? Who's Frank Wilder?
This is Frank Wilder. So Factory actually had like a truly like a mythic genesis. The whole thing was created with this idea of this kind of fictional character. We called him Frank Wilder. We built a whole life story around him. In fact, the project of Factory began with the biography of Frank Wilder, who became like an avatar for all of our collective aspiration. And it didn't have to resolve to some fragile ego. Like it wasn't some real person and their foibles. Like by creating an avatar that we actually had joint ownership of, it gave us the collective liberation to think way beyond our own self-imposed kind of structural limits. So Frank Wilder is spun out and is now an artist in his own right, something akin to Banksy. Frank is a jeweler. He is a sculptor in the 21st century, and he creates an incredible line of jewelry that it's an incredible story, the way that it works. If I can just break it down real quick.
Sure, yeah.
So Frank sculpts all of his jewelry, his totems, he would call them, in 3D, in ZBrush, in a tool used by character designers, like who were designing for World of Warcraft or something. But he sculpts these in his computer, traveling all over the world, seeking inspiration. But then he can 3D print them remotely, lost wax cast them in silver and gold and fine metals, and then drop ship them. So he runs a completely automated art empire, literally from a laptop. It's, to me, like the future of manufacturing, the future of business. And he's got a huge following. So all he does is he's on Snapchat and Instagram and telling epic stories, sharing his work. The beautiful thing is, too, he can just share the render, and then people place real orders, and he drop ships the jewelry. It's genius.
And so one of my favorite stories about Frank is that he's so brilliant with his storytelling is that he actually does these scavenger hunts on Snapchat. So he actually places his pieces and he makes his customers go find them around the city. So he did one where he actually put one in a jail cell in Alcatraz and you had to go find it and then videotape yourself. And so he brings this whole mythic archetype, just like our Superman heroes, but bringing it into real life. And so that's actually where we're seeing things going is that, with the birth of AR and all these cool technologies is that, what used to live in our game worlds are now starting to merge, and we saw it with Pokemon Go, and that's just gonna continue happening. But the beauty is that, manufacturing is cheap, all these tools are accessible for artists, and you can run your business on a laptop. So we're gonna see, I hope, a whole resurgence of a new kind of creativity and artistry coming out of the next generation. And the thing is, Frank is, just a young Canadian guy, like no one knows who he actually is, but the fact that he can actually create this identity online and generate such a following, tell stories that he, wouldn't even dare to tell in his real world, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. These are some of his stories.
He's doing a drop, he'd call this. So he's doing custom 3D printed sculptures now and just leaving them all over the city. And kids just go crazy, like they're just tripping over themselves to go find the piece. It's this amazing intersection of these mythic worlds and our real worlds. So inspiring to me. Mm-hmm. Ooh, this one's close to us.
Yeah. So we chose the word intimate because it does evoke the feeling, and I really think that like Pete was saying, with the birth of these co-living houses, co-working houses. Before you wouldn't even dare to necessarily go to a yoga class with your boss or have a a shamanic ceremony with your team, but that's now
Was there a time that you wouldn't have a shamanic ceremony with your team?
But and even co-founders being married, and our story is definitely one of those examples of the rise of dyadic leadership. And so, in this new world that we're entering, there is this blurring of lines, and you can't compartmentalize your life anymore, which also means that you actually have to bring your full self to work. You actually can't hide parts of yourself that you would normally maybe want to hide. So what I'm really excited about is actually this birth of a new type of work culture in which we actually are asked to actually bring our whole emotional intelligence to work as well, which I think has enormous, they call it soft skills, but I actually think it's the most important skills that we're faced with now, especially in the face of technology. So even that gut check, the 10 deep that we just did, we do that with all of our teams every meeting, and we even go deep into any sort of tension that people are feeling, and that's new. That hasn't existed before. So it makes me really excited.
Yeah. So one of the axes of this is just the rise of co-living and co-working, and what happens when you do everything together. I mean, there's a lot of shadow and light in this kind of scenario. How many people have lived in kind of a co-living kind of situation here? Wow.
Amazing.
How many people would do it again? You know, when you have all the tensions that are inevitable in your work relationship as it is, and the kind of just ego chafing that can happen naturally when people work together, then you're frustrated that you forgot to wash the dishes, or I keep leaving the toilet seat up. It's like this kind of tension, right? And also, like, what about intimacy in the Me Too generation? How do we really know where the boundaries are? I mean, I just feel myself like way more sensitive. Pete, maybe this is something we can pick up, but it's challenging, I think, that we want to get more emotional and more open in our whole life, which includes our work, at the same time that I feel like there's a lot of retraction, and I think people are being a lot more cautious now.
Another question is just how do you maintain boundaries in this new world, and especially at the risk of just being depleted and feeling, like you have no, structure in your life. So these are things that we live with. We don't necessarily have answers, but we're asking.
I think the other thing that we've seen is a lot of companies are investing in personal growth for their teams. Asana, I think, is one of our favorite examples.
Yeah, and Airbnb, and I would say that the rise of personal coaching, leadership development, Google, Search Inside Yourself, companies are investing hugely in these programs, and yet people are still searching for even more intimacy. They're still finding that they can't bring their fullest self to work.
And we call this dyadic leadership. So how do, this is our like fundamental life work. It's like, how do we really do life together? How do we lead together? How do we create enough space together that there's still air for the flame? And how do we still stay effective? What do you think?
And also I would say that the word dyadic means that there's a constant dialogue, and meaning that, actually there's a lot of upside as well to having co-founders that are partners, because you actually are able to, really enter like really real conversations in a way that, it didn't exist before. So I actually think that the rise of dyadic leadership is an amazing thing. I would argue that, actually, like, I think the next, wave of successful companies will be run by partners. So
Has
that's
anybody
my
here started
prediction.
a company or a project with a partner before? Would anybody do it again?
I see Bear and
You-
Kati in the back.
Sweet.
Beautiful.
And to bring us home, actually we got two more, but one of our favorites actually. Oh my gosh. What's this about?
So yeah, I would say that science killed religion, and in some senses there's a void, and we're experiencing that now. There's a rise of people going to Burning Man, for example. Elon Musk, Eric Schmidt, they're all known to have gone to Burning Man, and there's just generally the feeling that people are searching for this connection again to something greater, and in this new sort of very, like, people are calling it like post-rational or post-transactional world. I mean, there's all these buzzwords, but I think people are just feeling a lot of that postmodernism. Like, what is this? What's happens after?
What's postmodernism?
What's postmodernism?
Right.
So I think there's a general people are there's a void there that people are looking to fill, and in some senses we think that people are seeking, on a larger level, just a bigger context. Like, I think we've gotten so far down into optimization of our lives that there's almost a sense of like, what's the point? Where's their meaning?
Yeah. So yeah, Burning Man's a huge instance of this. How many people have been to Burning Man? Just polling. Good crew.
Amazing.
And I think you're right. It's like post-religion, then there's science, but like really tuning into what we lost in terms of community, what we lost in terms of rituals, how we had rites of passage, how we created an interval of time to check in with our own personal growth, with ourselves and with our tribe. There's so many roles that are being filled here. And yeah, I really see this as being one of the fundamental shaping forces of our generation.
And so why shamanic? I'm curious.
So shamans, we've been studying this for a bit now, and traditionally it was really well put to us that the shaman was the woman or man who sat on the fringe of the village or of the city. they kind of maintained this boundary relationship between the built world, the like civilization, and then the world that was beyond, call it nature. And they acted as kind of an intermediary between the worlds, with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I feel like times and spaces like Burning Man or Time and Space, this is one of the events that we put together, are a chance to put 1 foot out of the known world and check into our accounting with that which is beyond.
So tell me more about this time and space.
Time and space. So this is, I mean, oh my gosh, incredible shaman herself, Adele.
Bear and Kati, by the way, are with us
Yeah.
tonight. They also helped co-host. They're part of the Emergent Collective. And several people here, David McConville's been to one of our gatherings, and I'm missing many people, but
Yeah. So yeah, we all actually came together working with Burning Man. We worked on a kind of a skunk works project to buy land that was called Fly Ranch to build a permanent home for Burning Man. And in the aftermath of that whole experience, we found just such an incredible, am I skipping around all? Oh man, let's go back in time. There we go. We found that there was just more. That Burning Man was like a booster rocket, but we couldn't expect it to be everything. We couldn't expect it to colonize Mars. That we needed all of us to go and create our own Burning Mans, our own revolutions. And so ours we called Time and Space. It's been totally patron-funded. It's totally free for participants. It's roughly 75 people. We optimize for intergenerational, intercultural, interdisciplinary. And like one of our dinners, this was in this context. And really trying to bust our own bias, trying to create an experience where we could kind of triangulate, find the parallax in what's really going on, knowing that we're really susceptible to the bubble that we're in. So it's a chance to just have, I mean, they're long, they're like 6 days, and we try to blend, we call it kind of jokingly ceremonial innovation, and we'll do thinking work together, envisioning, and more design work, and we'll really do more deep kind of shamanic work and weave each other's threads together and get pretty deep. And then people get to go back, and it just ripples out. We've seen so much weaving together of people, and business deals come out of it, of course, but really people have a deeper sense of tribe and community and connection that we've just seen change a lot of lives now.
yeah, and I would say there's a, everyone knows about Summit and TED and all these gatherings that are starting to do, a little bit more kind of retreat-like gatherings and, Banff, et cetera. I think the difference here is that there's a level of, again, intimacy building on the last one that is generated in our gatherings that just brings in a level of, we would say that in the shamanic, like other realms, visioning and using that type of visioning and kind of, I would say, non-linear thought to get to a level of connection and also real inspiration as to what is really needed, rather than trying to solve more problems, as David McConville calls it, trying to dissolve more problems and actually transcend to a new paradigm rather than getting stuck in this similar loop of hackathons and trying to, think our way through to new solutions. Let's actually take a step back and have a little context, and from there, see something anew. So that's really the belief.
Yeah, and I'd say our hope for this, I'm reading a book right now that's Abraham Maslow's final book. It's the culmination of his life's work and him at his most philosophical, called The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. And here the master of self-actualization admits that self-actualization itself isn't the end game. Collective actualization is what it's about. And this is my strong belief at this point in my life so far, is like, yeah, sure, like you can get your own life dialed, but so what? Like, if we don't do it together and if we don't figure out how to be more than we are alone, how do we create a true collective intelligence, then I don't know that we'll make it. Even if we're all so dope and dialed and just got it figured out. Until we figure it out together, it doesn't matter. So this is our experiment.
And I would say that was our journey last year with EMERGENT, and we went through this whole process of trying to actually, we all had our own businesses, but look at what would it look like if we actually created a collective together? What if we actually put aside all of our own egos and our brands and actually just put it all into a pot and just said, okay, let's put that all aside. Like, what do we actually need to do together? What actually needs to happen? What does the world need right now? And that was a big moment that's, catalyzed a lot of major shifts in, I would say at least in the Bay Area, but the ripple effects are already happening.
Yeah. And to bring it home, quite literally, we're not sure what to call this. It's tricky naming these principles, but ecological feels a little bit anatomical, I don't know. But the idea of coming really back to nature, and we use quotes in nature intentionally because I know that this is nature, all of it. But there is a strong sense in our own lives, having lived at factory, having lived in like the super intense, inspiring, very kind of masculine, technocratic, like intensive pressure cooker, we moved to the Redwoods. We live on the fringe of Muir Woods and love our proximity to source. We realize that you don't have to live in the city and be delighted to go to nature. You can live in nature and come into the city when you need to. And it's been a whole reframe for us that I think we've seen now rippling out more and more. We live in Mill Valley, and just that little, like, just the swell, the creative undercurrent that's coming through there, the poets and the artists who've made that place so well-loved and worth its fame. But now there's a whole new generation moving in there who are also fed up with just the grind and with the baseline toxicity of the city, frankly, and really just looking to get back.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's people in this room that were part of like the Back to the Land movement in the 70s and 80s. I feel like time is a spiral, so we're just kind of coming back to that other part of the wheel. So that's just what's happening right now, and I joke about it, but it's like we are like sort of techno hippies. But yeah, there is this, a lot of this wave of a lot of our friends, like the founder of Asana, Justin Rosenthing. He owns one of the co-living houses, Agape. He recently just bought a big piece of land down near Palo Alto to move to and to build a whole bunch of properties for families and to have kids. And so, I would say that that's actually, we're kind of coming full cycle, but in a way that is still more integrated, I would say, with our lifestyle. So we're not fully going off-grid. We're not fully, just sort of totally piecing out, but there's an integration of this land and urban-rural polarity that's really interesting.
And we were just fascinated by this kind of Ouroboros, that like the winners who've like climbed the ranks of capitalism and have won and popped out, now they're like, well, shit, I'm gonna go buy a farm and start over and learn how to like grow my own food. It's really interesting to us. And we looked at the rise of just glamping and just kind of, there's like this cultural yearning to like get back to our roots. Again, this is, Big Sur, but all over Ojai, Baja, like tons of people that we know have made money. Gosh, so many people who just made money with Bitcoin are just buying beautiful tracts of land. And usually with a pretty strong ecological intention. There's a lot of conservancy is behind a lot of the instinct.
Yeah, I'm curious, just what do you think is different? And maybe people in the audience, like Ian Michaels here, who used to run Esalen, like I'm curious, maybe we can say that for after, but
yeah, we'll have
I think that there is, some nostalgic feelings, but there is also a feeling of, no, this is actually, we want to do it better, and we want to, in some ways, have it be, for our children, and also more integrated with our world that we want to build, including technology. So it's actually an intersection of nature and technology coming back together, which is interesting.
That's the hope. I don't know if they were ever disunited, but yeah.
That's true.
And just to end on this note, this is just our little vision.
Current project.
We call this Advance. We've been thinking about what's the culmination of all this innovation space and all this super heady stuff. We're like, no, let's just go camping together. So we designed this kind of futuristic camp to go bring creative teams out into the world and leave the known world and reconnect with something beyond. So Advance is kind of our fun little next thing.
We'll tell you more about that maybe in Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. A lot of food for thought. Can we also, can we swap out the headset for her? Okay. Could we do that though? Because it would be great to get another mic if we could.
Thank you for staying with us. That was a lot to get through. But
no, it was awesome. And I think you guys have mentioned so many times referenced people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many interesting characters in the audience here. We could actually, let's just roll into a little bit more of a conversation. I mean, I would just love, without me kind of steering it to start out here, what do people make of the kind of their distillation here? Start thinking about that, and we're going to kind of think about that. But I would say one thing for you guys is, how broadly is this different mindset kind of out there? Now, at some level, are you on the creative edge of this generation? Is this a kind of rarefied thing? Or do you feel that these are, what you're teasing out here are kind of more broadly shared, not just in this city, but also in generationally? I'm just curious on how you situate your own experience and what you distilled here with essentially a broader kind of context of how it plays out more broadly. Any thoughts on that? And then we're going to roll it in here very quickly here to everybody else.
Obviously, we're bound by our own experience, and we made the choice to tell a more personal story tonight. But from what I've learned, like this is how change happens. It's amongst, what is it? Never underestimate the power of a dedicated group of people to change the world. It's in fact all that ever has. I really feel that the people who are coming together and the leverage they have, it's entrepreneurs and it's leaders who are drawn to the world that we're describing here. The people who are partaking in this world are shaping the next paradigm, I believe. At least a large part of it. Not all of it, of course, but we really are just setting out to create a vision of the world that we want to live in. And I think it's catching root. We've seen glimpses of it. I mean, Bear, like all over the world. Bear was Burning Man's chief evangelist and has been to every continent seeking out the people who are torchbearers of what we just described. And they're everywhere, would you say?
I would say that map that we showed is pretty accurate. You know, we definitely find our kin wherever we go. So it's not new, and it's not anything that, I would say it's definitely on the cutting edge in terms of just the overall population. So we're like on the fringe, for sure, in terms of overall population. But I think that it's crazy just how fast things just influence and the memes spread really quickly. So when I was in, we were in Berlin together. When I was in Turkey, I was starting to find all of these co-housing, Agora Collective. There's tons of them happening. But I think that there is something here that is very unique, and it has always sort of been this I don't know, just this laboratory for the future. And so I do feel like we are, in some ways, because we're so saturated in it, we may take it for granted. But I do think that we are definitely on the cutting edge, of what's happening.
Here in the Bay Area, talking about that. And then what's interesting is you asked some questions about like co-housing and how many people have done it. And there was a kind of multi-generations putting their hands up there. I mean, to what extent, just to kind of clarify a little bit, do you think there's something very distinct with your generation that didn't happen before, as opposed to kind of previous co-housing or previous kind of back to the land, or some of these things that resonated with earlier generations? Is there any way that you start to think about, because of the technology, because of the opportunities that you have that previous generations didn't have? I'm just curious how you distinguish from those past cycles.
Some say, we mentioned this, but people say that time is a circle. I don't have the illusion at all that anything that we just shared is truly new. I bet that every generation invents these patterns for themselves. But I don't know if time's a circle. It feels to me more like a spiral. And it feels like it gets a little tighter. It's like a helix. And we learn and we echo, right? History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And so, yeah, I think that it's also like, I think we've seen it even with psychedelics and kind of going way overboard in the 60s, and now everybody's microdosing and it's way more measured, right? There's like a level of integration and refinement, I think, that happens generation to generation.
Yeah, I also say factory is not a cheap kind of scrappy house. And
it's not a flat pad, yeah.
It's like, and I think there's also, I think that one of the fundamental differences is that, we are really, we're all entrepreneurs. We're working in very intense sprints together. We're not just hanging out. There's a level of intensity as well, and I wouldn't say competition, but there is this sort of, how is your sales doing, and there is that level of like you're working side by side together on your businesses, but you're also living together, and I don't know if that was necessarily true in previous cycles.
Yeah, I don't think Ram Dass and Timothy Leary were up, with like Nike executives up there scouting. There is also, there's an integration too with like the kind of more default world. The rules are out the window, it feels like today, and the world's looking for a new paradigm. And I really feel like there's a collective humility that's like open to looking at things differently Because it just seems like just nobody knows what's going on. So there's an openness in culture that I feel right now that ideas like these can gain root and gain volume in a way that I don't know if they could a couple decades ago.
How much do you think you not just you, but this scene, this generation is reacting to what they don't want to go from previous generations, reacting against the existing system, the economy, the existing way work is organized, the existing even politics and stuff. Do you see it as reactive and kind of rejecting and wanting to find something different, or do you feel, how do you think about it vis-a-vis the world that's out there right now?
I definitely think it's a reaction. I think that I think I could speak for most of my peers that we're pretty allergic to offices in general. Like there's a reaction against the over-corporatized, over-commercialized, optimized, just, like there's just this allergy to it. And I think that there is a reaction against, in some senses, the commercial, the way that capitalism has just unfolded and created this massive level of inequality that I think we just can't stand. That there's just we see it every day, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be an incremental change. Like there's a fundamental paradigm shift that we're wanting. Like it's not like, oh, let's just work a little less, maybe one time a week. It's like no. Like let's just completely blow all that out of the window. What is a truly integrated work life? Like how do we want to design our life? I think that's a question that we all ask all the time, and it's genuinely coming from a designer's perspective. Like, what? Like I think for most of us, actually, we ask how can we be most our well-being? Honestly, our well-being and most fulfillment and sense of purpose in our life versus optimizing for, making a lot of money.
But one of the things you said just a moment ago.
Okay, could you get a mic down here?
Set your egos aside. Well, I would say, having lived communally and cooperatively and in villages in Papua New Guinea, that setting ego aside is, I would say, the beginning. And given where we are in this country right now with Mr. Ego, where he is, I would say, I would love your response. How do you, in a personal living situation, in a business situation, in an out there selling to corporation situation, deal with that? Because that is there in a village in Papua New Guinea, it's there in a commune in Canada, it's there in a cooperative house in San Francisco in the 80s, and I would love to know what you're doing and feeling around that right now.
Thanks for asking.
Great question.
Everyone do you want to react to that? That's great. Let's roll into the crowd.
I mean, I would offer that we definitely don't have it figured out. We just put a lot of time into a big effort to create a platform, a blockchain platform for decentralized leadership, specifically trying to technologize this exact question and to create collective intelligence powered by blockchain. And the project, in one variation, just kind of spun out. And it happened for very human reasons. It was ultimately came down to very subtle human trust and respect. And it was such a shame. There was so many resources, so much brilliance behind this project and capital and everything you could want. And it ultimately came down to just the most basic human frailties, quite honestly. What we can say that we are trying to do is to build new rituals into our life that create at least a feedback loop, right? Like creating rhythms of checking in with ourselves and with each other that we can't go too long spinning out and getting spun up into our own egos. So every morning we have a morning practice. That's like a reset. Every meeting we have our 10 deep breaths. We didn't do it with you. We thought about it, but a gut check where we just have a minute to just share what's going on for us right now and what we're bringing into the meeting emotionally. And you'd be amazed at what that changes. How much we're picking at each other because we have this unspoken thing that if you just gave somebody the moment to speak about it and to share what was true for them, you could just diffuse. So we've seen traction, I have to say, with some of these rituals. Again, we don't have it figured out. I feel patiently hopeful that in the long run, we're going to work it out. Anything to add?
All right, there are so many interesting people. I'm going to call out a couple people that I know are related to different scenes. Like Tony, would you, because you're kind of rooted in the embassy, what you saw here, would you just kind of reflect quickly? Are you comfortable with kind of saying how what you saw here is, would you add anything to it, or is this kind of resonating? And maybe Bear, if you wanted to add, I mean, I'm just interested in getting a few hits from people who are deeply immersed in this space. If you, just a little feedback on what you heard here. Any kind of thoughts on?
Hi, thanks, both of you. Thank you, Peter. So my name's Tony. I've lived at the Embassy, which is another co-living house, for 5 years, and lived for 4 months at the Red Vic, which was another house that was mentioned. I really love this. This was so beautiful. Thank you for representing. I think one of the really interesting points about the question you just asked about ego is something about the tension or the polarity between the individual and the collective. And I think that one of the pieces that comes out for me as part of living in a co-living space is being able to play with that tension and recognize it less as a necessarily an either-or tension, but something that, you know, operates as a spiral as well, in a sense. So I think that comes out in any situation, though, where you have multiple parties sort of framing agreements together. So within a company or a cooperative, I think this is sort of trying to take some of the lessons that have been learned around how we can do things and have these non-zero-sum games that allow us to be more than ourselves individually, and try and apply those in again, more integrated, holistic ways. So I think that the journey there is one of governance, in a sense, and I think that's what we have been experimenting with most of all at the Embassy, which maybe, you know, is something particular about my particular housemates, but I think it's one of those sort of broader, bigger questions that are coming into the blockchain space, and just thinking about how we govern these frameworks that can help us as individuals spiral up into that. I think you called it collective actualization. I love that so much. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Nice insight. Bear, did you want to add something? Could you get a mic here? Hey, brother. Oh, there's a hug.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. This is so beautiful. Don't they make just beautiful things? We can talk, but it's nice to have all this amazing imagery. You know, in terms of an insight, I guess for me, I'm trying to remember who said it. There's that quote that the psychopath drowns in the same ocean that the hero wades in, or whatever it is. But like, you know, I think we're at such a weird void in our culture, and you know, blockchain coming in and us still not really understanding how that's going to be disruptive, and then the froth of the sort of early adopter energy, and a lot of greed, and a lot of, you know, people are familiar with spiral dynamics. So a lot of the green meme is something that's coming up a lot, I think, as we move out of this sort of capitalistic game where we all acknowledge, hey, we're here to win, so we can play by that game together. And as we move into this new realm of, like, you know, a relativistic modality where maybe offending somebody is worse than actually speaking truth. Maybe it's more dangerous to disagree than to actually succeed. And so, you know, to some extent, I think here in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, at least from what I've witnessed, maybe as we experiment with these new modalities of creating culture, while there also is this, you know, tried and true lean startup way of prototyping technologies, where do those worlds actually meet versus the delusion of where we want them to meet? I think that's the millennial generation's impasse right now. And it's inside of every single one of us to go through that process. And yeah. Love you guys.
Here's this woman here, right in the middle here. Let's. This is great. Great themes here, coming from all kinds of different people here.
I work at an environmental nonprofit, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about conversations you've had about the environment and political activism around that, and climate change, and taking action to change the direction the Earth and humanity is going on that front.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the background, the cosmic background reality that we're dealing with right now. Like, it's definitely omnipresent. I wish it was more in the forefront of more of the talented people that I know's mind and even our own lives. I mean, Doc North over here, for example, led an expedition to raise awareness around climate change called Save the Ice with our late friend Dan Fredenberg. There's definitely people taking action. Ideate or Burning Man Camp does a lot of carbon offsets for its own stuff. I mean,
We have BFI here.
actually, yeah. So
Don.
I have to just shout out Mr. David McConville and Faith and some of the people here from the Buckminster Fuller Institute who are taking long-term planetary survival very seriously. And so I would say that, I mean, a lot of the land purchasing that we talked about is conservation land purchases. Gosh, I mean, what we are trying to create are the communities of capital and talent and purpose that align precisely for these kinds of issues. A whole huge swath of our tribe is going to any of like the UN climate events. People are actively engaged. We didn't mention it as much, but it's definitely, it's just the thing. It's just the thing that everybody knows is the most important thing.
I
What
would
you add?
say, you know, so Tom Chi, I don't know if he's here tonight, but you know, he really was the one who taught us the methods of, you know, these design thinking practices that we've used with teams. And now, since he left Factory and all of us have kind of dispersed, I would say there's been a struggle to figure out really how to apply like what we've learned to such a big systemic issue. And so we've had hackathons, we've had these events that he's helped run, and we've run with other groups. But I would just say that there is this sense of, you know, kind of it's not quite apathy, but it's just a general like, it's almost like the systems issues are so large that our own processes don't apply to them anymore. Like we're kind of in this transitional stage where we're trying to actually invent the new processes that we need to get there. And so personally, like it's been a challenge for me, and I would say in a lot of our community. And what happens is that people will work on these on the side, you know, in the free time that they have, but they're still, you know, focused on their, you know, their day-to-day work for the most part, the majority.
I'll give you two examples too, just from our direct work. We worked with Nike, for example, to optimize their supply chain, specifically around sustainability. That was the thesis and the brief of like how to basically get people to mail in their shoes to be recycled and upcycled. And worked with an entrepreneur named Tom Dinwiddie, who built and sold a big solar company, and came to us to help him to conceive of a whole digital platform to go with a film that he was financing around climate change and solutions to climate change. And I got to be honest, like I spent 6 months building a platform that was designed to catalyze collective action and take responsibility in people's lives, and working with O-Power and some of the utilities companies and things. And it's just such a massive issue that it's so big, it's hard, it's just overwhelming to even think about, and how one takes personal responsibility in the context of it. And then building even a tech product around that, it was honestly one of the hardest things I ever worked on. And I came out of it more frustrated than not. So I mean, I wish there was an easier answer, and I'll say we're doing our best, but.
But I'm curious if there's anyone else in the room that can maybe speak better, you know, more eloquently.
One thing that
Mike.
Kate Linforth, and I'm joined a group called Resilient Neighborhoods in Marin, and it's taking the Drawdown book and mixing it with social. So we get in groups of 9, and we get together, we commit to a certain number of Wednesdays, and we're practicing drawdown, and there's 1,000 ways you can kneel and kiss the ground, and it's making my life very sacred. It's amazing. I mean, we can draw down carbon and bring sacredness to our lives all in one and have community. So it's Resilient Neighborhoods in Marin. It's just in Marin so far. I want to help scale it. If anybody's into joining that effort, let me know. But the Drawdown book is a great blueprint if anyone doesn't know of it.
Yeah, we
Where-
actually Paul launched his book actually here at this forum actually. So that's but that is a great one. But we also, this woman behind you wanted to talk here too. Now, and you are associated with one of these places?
A little bit, yeah. So my name is Verna Bhargava, and I work for an innovation strategy firm called Scansion. We do a lot of futurism work, but I had the fortune of working with Ting and Carson and a few others here at the factory as well. And kind of what you were just saying brought to mind some thoughts about the earlier question of being a reaction to some things. And the distinction I wanted to make a little bit with kind of the work we do, and Carson was just talking about this, is that you'll notice it's not that it's a reaction where it's sort of like, forget corporate America, we're all gonna run away and just do our own thing and ignore it. It's more of, I think initially there's a reaction to the ideals and some of the principles that we decide we don't agree with. But then there is a very proactive sort of effort to cultivate some of that awareness and figure out, well, in what ways can we also, like the shaman, live on the edge a little, observe both sides of the world, and then bring it back a little bit and try to act as that bridge. And so I found that post-factory where I work right now, we're working with a lot of corporations as well, and there are little ways you can sort of influence process, influence the way they approach something, and within the culture they're dealing with. Because oftentimes, as many of us notice, when you actually get to know the client, you get to know the team, they want that change, but they can't always act on that change within their organization. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways I found one of the ways I found that we can approach that is actually trying to look past the functional and the emotional needs of the client, what they're trying to accomplish in the project, and really getting to what's meaningful so that they have the tools to actually then go and continue to work with their teams and keep looking for what the meaningful experience is. And when you can really get and teach them to look for the meaningful experience, then you've already started to enact a little bit of that mental, sort of mental model change a little bit. And so it's really not about just rejecting the corporate culture and just saying we're going to react to that, but also how do we proactively go back and influence a little bit of that thinking. So,
Thank you.
Ruben, and introduce yourself, but Ruben's also rooted in the embassy. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Could you stand up and just for your
so I'll ask this question as a story, in the form of a story. My name's Ruben Steiger, and I'm the founder of a company called Pattern 5. And so about a year and a half ago, I live on the East Coast, and I'm obviously pure Gen X, right? So I'm intergenerational. But I began this journey of weird experiences where I saw a lot of these technologies that I thought were interesting, but it was tools like VR and AR. And so I started coming to San Francisco to figure out how to make a company that invested in companies in this age, what you call the emergent age. But by like sort of happenstance, I ended up staying at the embassy. And so it brings me to my question, which is, I think it seems like there's a cultural and generational thing going on, and the living circumstances that we're seeing blend live and work. But my question is about family, because while I've been here, I've been spending 2-3 weeks a month here booting this thing up. My kids are at home, and it doesn't seem like in living at the embassy, that was one thing I've noticed. I sort of was like, I went native there, and I was a real cultural anomaly because there are no families that have sort of slotted into this living structure. So I wonder how you see that next evolution. Do you see that as an evolution of these emergent communities?
100%.
Great question.
100%.
Question.
Everybody we just described buying land is doing it because they're having kids. So that's the hack. It's like, yeah, we don't fit in the Victorian mansion together. We need some acreage. And we want our kids to be raised together. We want to build a Montessori together. Like, we want to do life together. Like, there's all these pockets and crews, the Agape crew and Justin Rosenstein, same story. Like, everybody, I mean, the millennials are coming into age, and that's really what's next. And I think that's going to be when we build more communities, like true communities together.
Yeah, I would say we're involved with a couple land projects, Big Sur and around the Bay Area, that we're specifically focusing on, like birthing centers and schools, and actually how do we actually apply this to family life together, with the intention that we all want to have our kids together and have our kids play together and really look at every aspect of that as well. So schools to all the way up to, running the land together. So I would say that's like front of mind. It just hasn't, in terms of age, we're still at the point where most of us are still working and haven't had kids yet, but it's definitely the plan.
We're still going to work when we have kids. And Ruben, I'd add that there's actually, interestingly, work on the other end of the Ouroboros, too. There's the children being born, but then actually Maddie, so the founder of Factory's partner, his dyadic partner, is building something called Lifehouse. It's effectively Factory for senior citizens. So creating like integrated housing and co-living for people over 65, and building in super holistic lifestyle and culture, and just creating just rethinking senior citizens, and just creating, and also creating an intersection again. Like, it's so obvious. I mean, every culture in history, it seems like, tribes. Like, you had the the older people take care of the younger people, and it just worked. And the fact that we segregated, I just think is ridiculous. I hope we're working towards reintegration.
So I want to know, can I out you, Kevin? I'd be curious. And we're going to get to Greg here. But this intergeneration, the differences, because, and knowing what you know about these folks, is there anything that's really distinct from you that seems to be very different about what's going on here from your generation, generations you've watched before? And is there anything that is struck you as more original than not, than a pattern?
Yeah, so I'm Kevin Kelly from Wired, worked with Pete. And a couple other people. Jim Daly was here, I noticed. There's probably others, I'm not sure. So I'm processing this, and I think, to a first approximation, the difference does seem to be the 60s, the original hippies, really did reject technology and the corporate system entirely. It was a drop-out mechanism. It was a way to leave that and restart civilization. It was kind of like a reboot. It was rebooting, and most of the communes were fairly low tech and proud of that. And I think what I'm kind of hearing, if your example is representative, I'm not sure it is, but if it is, then it seems as if it's trying to integrate into the corporations, it's trying to integrate with technology. It's less of a dropping out and more of a version 2 of something, where you are taking the best of the naturalistic, the best of the hippie world, and trying to meld it, wed it with the techno. So the techno hippie is actually not a bad, not a bad term. And so, that, and I think in many ways, our mutual friend Stuart Brand is sort of like the originator of that, where he was overseeing and documenting and servicing the people dropping out, but he was among the first to say, oh no, these personal computers are appropriate technology, and they can be used to enhance and augment the well-being of life. And so I think we're in this process of trying to integrate those domains, and I think, as you're suggesting, the answers are not clear, but what I think you're trying to pioneer is a process for how you do that.
Yeah.
It's a how do you answer the question?
You're
of how do
process
you,
designers.
Right. So it's like, is there, and that's also maybe a difference from the first version. There was no process. It was just people dropping out, reinventing things. There was rituals, but they weren't really trying to integrate. They were trying to remain separate. And so now the question is like, what's the design process. The innovation is the process that throws off answers, throws off solutions, but the real innovation seems to be around the process. What's the process that will answer the question of, how do you deal with climate change? What's that process that we get to that? So I think what I'm hearing is you're not coming with answers, not coming with solutions or apps or products, but you're trying to say, what's the process that we get
Exactly.
Exactly.
yield those things? And so you and everybody here seem to be working on how do we, and then what's the process to make the process, the meta thing.
Turtles all the way down.
Right, turtles all the way down. So my question is, how global is this frontier? I'm really interested in the kind of the global answers, because for better or worse, I think what millennials or what people in America think doesn't really matter, won't matter so much in the future as the rest of the world rises quickly. Just the arithmetic is against us. And so the question is, are the Chinese millennials, or the Indian millennials, or the African millennials thinking the same thing? Are they at where you're at, or will they soon be at where you're at? Are they in this, or is this really just something that isn't going to translate? So I know, Ting, you were spending a lot of time in China, and I spent a lot of time in China, and some of the things in your list I can recognize, but I don't recognize all of them. And so what's your thinking about how global is this thing right now? That's my question to you.
Thank you.
Great question.
It's always hard. My dad asks me questions. I'm gonna think about that for a second. Do you want to go
Dinner
first?
table.
Yeah.
Just think of the dinner table every. Oh
man.
It's like since I was a kid.
Dad, not in front of everybody.
Like at dinner table every day.
Dad,
I go first. I'm gonna think first.
Kevin, I just first really appreciate the reflection and synthesis. That's helpful. And thinking about it in terms of process, I think that's right on. You asked if the Chinese are as far as we are. I would tell you they're way further. The most inspiring project that I've seen in the world is a Imagine factory in a 57-story skyscraper that's full of artists and craftspeople and chefs and coffee baristas on a campus of like an eco-futuristic, amazing, super successful company in China that built its fortune making dramatically more efficient air conditioners for building, like large-scale, skyscraper scale. They use
Like carbon
waste
neutral.
heat from building processes to cool buildings through this like chilling, amazing science. And they built this huge empire out of it. The dad is this like, the guy who built this empire is this man who's a fine artist and then turned into an inventor and then coined this system and then scaled it. It's called Broad. So Broadtown, they have the square kilometer campus, they have a model of Versailles and the Great Pyramid of Giza and all these little homes from every culture in the world. It's this weird little, uniquely Chinese, idiosyncratic little universe. And then his son, his only son in the one-child, country, is a Carnegie Mellon trained architect, super visionary. He studied sustainable engineering and architecture and he has built this tribe there that dwarfs anything that we've done here, to be honest. They have they're printing modular buildings that they also are printing on site in this campus. And they're just this beacon of hope for the Chinese youth there's not a lot of places like this, but this place just gravitates everybody. And they're just, it's literally the most inspiring thing that I've ever seen. And it gives me profound hope because I worry about our bias all the time. And so to see them and realize no, man, we got this. Like the human instinct, the human spirit wants to move beyond its limitations. And I think given the space and the resources and the time, I think we will.
Yeah, and I would say we brought Daniel and his girlfriend to Burning Man, actually.
Daniel's the son.
Yeah, so we brought Daniel to Burning Man, and so there's some of the principles that I wouldn't say that were happening organically, But because they are pretty global and they've started cross-pollinating with our community, with the Burning Man community, it's actually at the partnership of East and West that this is happening. So because we're all pretty nomadic, we're moving around pretty quickly and starting to pollinate in these different communities, we're actually kind of fitting each other's grooves. So they're teaching us a lot about ecological building, and we're teaching them about shamanism. So it's this exchange, and I think that in some ways, yeah, I would answer, like, my guess would be that the same thing's happening in India, but I just don't know yet, or at least the seedlings are, because again, the internet, just everything travels so quickly. Our videos are getting shared, and so there is this, it's already happening. I definitely think that some of the other aspects that we're pioneering in terms of immersion and some of the specifics of it are definitely specific to us. But again, it's a process, and there is a similar inquiry or desire that we're finding. Like when we actually started talking to Daniel in China, he was just sharing that, like, literally, he's like, do you want to do a workshop on, like, sound healing? I can get like 200 kids there. So there's curiosity, there's interest. They just don't have access yet, and so it's actually about building the bridges, which is why my passion, I think my life's work is really to build the bridge between East and West. And so the more that we can actually build those bridges, and also, north to south. So how can we build more of those bridges and those pathways and actually increase more access? And I think that it's just going to start happening very emergently. It's already happening, and I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in it, but from what I've seen from traveling in a lot of Asia, more of South America, I'm starting to see it, and it's blowing my mind. I mean, we just came back from Mexico City on Sunday, and just the creativity that's happening there. Rent is still cheap. There's this fire there that we were considering, like, should we get an apartment in Mexico City?
Yeah, why are we paying Mill Valley prices? We're going to Mexico.
So it's happening.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Ting's mother, who was here, Ming, she's fluent in Chinese and can navigate, and she knows what she's talking about in Chinese. Unlike a lot of Americans dipping in and out. I know Greg was going to answer a question. We got a few questions here. And by the way, we're going to have food for everyone, time to talk, more drinks and all that right around the corner here. But here's a guy who's actually working on a floating island, which is going to be about the most immersive work-live place out there. You identify yourself there, Greg.
Thanks, Pete. Greg DeLon, I'm with the Seasteading Institute and with Blue Frontiers, and we're working on floating islands in French Polynesia, and that is a direct response to the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And in that work, very much on topic, I think, with Kevin's question and your comments, and really perhaps underscoring the nomadic and shamanic aspects of what you're doing. And thank you very much. Really, really interesting work that you're doing. Certainly one of the things that we're finding is that as we come in with this, can't deny that it's super high tech what we're doing in terms of these super high tech integrated islands, but with the growing pains of working in that environment, understanding that we're really learning from them in terms of the French Polynesian culture and all their relationship to not just nature, but in particularly the ocean and mythology and all these sorts of things, and that it's easy sometimes, and I certainly sense that you all don't feel this way, but it's easy sometimes to think of the Bay Area and this new spiritualism and things related to Burning Man and other sorts of festivals, et cetera, that somehow we're doing something new or something that we're going out and teaching the world. When in reality, what I hear you saying, and my question is, that when you're dealing with these other cultures, indigenous or historical cultures, that in exchange with the technology and giving a French Polynesian the capacity to fly around the world in a jet plane and to hook up with high-speed fiber, that's where the magic in the future can really happen, in terms of really not us in Silicon Valley giving access to the world with technology, but that technology giving us access to the brilliance and the importance and the teaching of what humanity has known for thousands of years, but now we have to relearn. So I sense that's where you're coming from, but I'd love to hear your comment on that.
Thank you.
Do you have a thought?
Go ahead.
Thoughts on that?
I mean, gosh, yeah, like you just named it. It's like, this is our question, though. It's like, how do we, like the reason that we're designers is I wanted to pursue a career and a passion that would reward me for empathy and for listening and for being in tune with what's really true. And so that's absolutely what I aspire to. And our process, like from our interpersonal rituals to the immersion work, like Kevin, to your point, it's about process. And we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out how we can be as the best collective intelligence we can. What is it to be the best node that we can be in the meta superorganism we're all part of that really enables each of our wisdom to come to bear? We know that every lens obscures as much as it reveals. So how do we strike that balance? It's definitely the question we're asking. Thank you for that articulation.
Yeah, I would really agree with you, and it's an active question for me, which is why I don't really have a clear answer right now. Something that I'm playing with right now is doing a lot of council circles, and that's really, it's an ancient technology that's used really just a structure or a process for harvesting collective intelligence. And I've been starting to do this with my own community as well as when I go meet, in China, starting to do that as well. And I think that as long as we, maintain, I would say just the practice of doing those kinds of, having those conversations as well as creating that kind of space for that wisdom exchange, that's the process. That's all I can do. And I totally agree with you that it's less of us teaching and more of us listening. So that is what I believe, in terms of each of us as designers, and actually why we've also left factory, because it was very much of that opposite strategy, very masculine. We're actually moving into this much more feminine, more listening, integrated type of leadership, and we need to invent the new process. We can pull from the past, but projects like yours, like everything that we've been sort of stewing in, we're the experiment. We are the frontier in some ways. We all are, and it's our responsibility as pretty, I would say, privileged creators to be able to do that. So thank you for that question.
If I can just have one closing thought, too, on your question, because it's really, it's become my principle at its core that, we called it the emergent age, and that comes from, even to me, like Claude Shannon and communication theory, and seeing like, okay, we're wired up enough. There's enough nodes with enough bandwidth that there's like something that can come to rise above in an emergent kind of dimension, above and beyond our individuality. And this idea of feedback loops really is central to our life at all scales. Cultivating and nurturing healthy feedback loops. And so that's what we try to do in our relationship. It's what we do in Circle with our friends. It's what we do in our work. And I think, it's my intuition, and there's a lot wiser and smarter and more experienced people than I here who maybe have a better idea, but I had the intuition that the way forward for all of us is cultivating and nourishing healthy feedback loops.
Well, folks, I could ask about another 20 questions. There are other hands up here. But that's a nice place to close, I think, as the process here. I tell you, you could hear a pin drop here, even right now, even though we're holding you back from having a drink. But I would say, let's everyone give these guys a great hand for what they do. It was a really thoughtful, and we should all think about this, but here's the deal. We're actually going to have food out here, more drinks. We're going to have there are arcade games here. We're going to actually have more of a kind of a funner party. We're going to have some music on here a little bit. You're encouraged to stay and stay later than we normally do it here. There is a guy walking around here who's our tech guru, Matt Sangbush. Matt is here, who does the live streaming. Matt has a bunch of quarters in his belt here. And if you give him $1, he'll give you some quarters, and you can play. These are absolutely the original games down half size to scale. All the money goes to charity. There's 4 of them classics from when the millennials were young folks banging around in the earliest days. Anyhow, a little fun thing there. And I will say, but stay around, hang on. And I want one last time, because I think for just a sense of connecting with people, how many people are attached right now, or at least way familiar with one of these kind of live worth kind of scenes? If you could just raise your hand so that folks can kind of see interesting characters who actually, you could actually go up, ask them, talk about it, and let's kind of build off what you started today. So let's thank you so much. And next month, we've got space, the startup space scene, actually in Silicon Valley. We're going to go away from the kind of in-tune process into kind of how do we get to Mars. And I'd love to have that. But for now, let's stay in the zone here. Enjoy yourself. The bar's back open. Thanks again. One last time.
Thank you.
Thank you.